At 7:12 a.m., the last text message left Emily Hart's phone, and then her world went completely quiet. The morning looked ordinary from the outside. A pale sun pushed through thin clouds, and the neighborhood stirred with the usual routines: a dog barking behind a fence, a car door slamming, someone's coffee machine humming through an open kitchen window. Inside the Hart house, though, something felt off. Emily, a 16-year-old with a habit of sending quick updates to her friends the moment she woke up, had written only a short line to her best friend: "I'll tell you later." No emoji. No follow-up. No second message. Minutes passed. Then an hour. By mid-morning, Emily's friends noticed what wasn't happening. No snaps. No posts. No "on my way" texts. Emily was the kind of girl who never went silent, not because she craved attention, but because she was consistent. If she was late, she said so. If she was upset, she'd vent in a dozen messages and then apologize for being dramatic. Silence wasn't her style. Her family's worry turned sharp when her phone stopped pinging altogether. No activity. No sign she'd logged into anything. It was as if the device had been dropped into deep water, except the signal didn't drift, it simply stayed dead. The call to police came before lunchtime. Soon, patrol cars rolled slowly past the Hart home. Officers spoke in low voices at the front door while neighbors gathered in small clusters, hands tucked into pockets, faces tense with that particular fear that spreads fast in quiet places. By afternoon, volunteers arrived, people in hiking boots and bright jackets, forming lines to comb the nearby trails, the creek edge, the empty lots behind the shopping strip. Someone brought a stack of printed flyers. Someone else brought bottled water. The air filled with urgent footsteps and polite, strained questions. Detectives began where they always began, the last confirmed place Emily had been. Inside the house, they asked everyone to repeat the morning like a script. What time did you wake up? Who saw her? What did she say? Did anything seem unusual? Two relatives, close enough to be considered part of Emily's daily life, sat side by side at the kitchen table and answered with eerie sameness. Their phrases matched. Their pauses matched. They even corrected themselves in the same places, like actors who had practiced a scene until the timing felt natural. They both insisted Emily was fine. They both insisted she left on her own. They both insisted they heard nothing strange. The lead investigator, Detective Marissa Kane, didn't argue. She simply watched. Years on the job had taught her the difference between shock and performance. Real fear was messy. Real confusion contradicted itself. But these statements were polished, almost neat, like someone had ironed the wrinkles out of the story. By nightfall, search teams returned with mud on their shoes and disappointment in their eyes. The neighborhood lights blinked on one by one, and Emily's bedroom window stayed dark. Detective Kane requested a full forensic sweep of the upstairs, starting with Emily's room. And when the specialists finally entered, they didn't find chaos. They found something worse, a space that looked too clean, as if someone had tried to erase a morning that wasn't supposed to be remembered. The forensic team moved slowly, methodically, as if the house itself might react if startled. Emily's bedroom was first. Her bed was made with unusual precision, the corners tucked too tightly for a teenager who usually kicked blankets onto the floor. Her backpack was gone. Her shoes were missing. But everything else, posters, makeup, notebooks, sat exactly where they always had. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. Then the luminol lights came on. Under the soft blue glow, faint marks bloomed across the carpet near the foot of the bed. Not splashes. Not pools. Just traces, thin, uneven patterns that suggested something had been wiped, scrubbed, diluted. A technician knelt closer, careful not to disturb the fibers. "Someone tried very hard here," he murmured, "but not hard enough." Samples were taken. Fibers collected. The mattress was lifted, the frame examined. Behind the headboard, barely visible to the naked eye, was a smear no larger than a thumbprint. Embedded in it was a partial fingerprint. Detective Kane watched from the doorway as the evidence was sealed and labeled. Her instincts tightened. This wasn't a runaway scene. This wasn't panic. This was control. Downstairs, the same two relatives waited, sitting too straight on the couch, hands folded, eyes flicking toward the staircase every time someone walked past. When Kane asked again about the morning, their answers came quickly, too quickly. Each repeated the timeline with matching certainty. Emily had woken up. Emily had gone upstairs. Emily had left the house. No one had heard her scream. No one had heard a struggle. But neighbors told a slightly different story. One woman mentioned a sharp sound sometime after sunrise, maybe a door slamming, maybe something falling. Another neighbor recalled seeing a familiar car idling longer than usual in the driveway before pulling away fast, tires crunching gravel harder than necessary. As the hours passed, digital forensic analysts reported nothing new from Emily's phone. No movement. No login attempts. No battery drain consistent with normal use. It hadn't traveled. It hadn't been turned back on. It had been silenced. By the second day, search efforts expanded. Dogs were brought in. Drones buzzed overhead. The local news vans arrived, their cameras pointed carefully away from grieving faces. Emily's photo, smiling, mid-laugh, flashed across television screens with a hotline number beneath it. Behind the scenes, the fingerprint result came back. It belonged to a family member. The room went quiet when Detective Kane read the report. She didn't announce it right away. Instead, she ordered background checks, phone records, purchase histories. She wanted context. She wanted patterns. And patterns appeared quickly. A credit card linked to one of the relatives showed unusual activity on the morning Emily disappeared. Protective gloves. Heavy-duty trash bags. Cleaning supplies. Tools that had no reasonable place in a normal weekday routine. Even more troubling, a second card, belonging to his girlfriend, showed matching purchases at a different store, less than an hour later. When officers brought the couple in for formal interviews, they arrived calm. Cooperative. Almost relieved. They repeated their stories again, just as polished as before. But this time, Detective Kane slid a photo across the table, the fingerprint, highlighted in red. The man's eyes dropped for just a second. And in that second, the story they had rehearsed began to fall apart. The interview room felt colder after the photograph hit the table. Detective Kane didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence did the work for her. The man, Daniel Brooks, stared at the image of the fingerprint as if it might rearrange itself into something harmless. His girlfriend, Laura Miles, crossed her arms tightly, eyes fixed on the wall. For the first time since Emily vanished, their movements were no longer synchronized. Daniel spoke first. He said the print meant nothing. He said he had been in Emily's room before, helping fix a shelf, looking for something she'd misplaced. His explanation was quick, defensive, layered with unnecessary detail. Kane let him talk. Then she asked a single question. Why was it in a substance that had been cleaned? Daniel stopped. Laura shifted in her chair. Her breathing changed, shorter, sharper. When Kane turned to her, Laura shook her head before a question was even asked. Hours passed. Stories bent, then cracked. Timelines shifted by minutes, then by hours. By evening, Daniel asked for a break. When he returned, his shoulders had collapsed inward, as if the weight of the house had finally settled on him. What followed wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was quieter than that. Daniel admitted there had been a plan, One he said was meant to scare Emily, to force her to leave the house for a while. He claimed it was never supposed to go that far. He described an attempt to restrain her, insisting she would calm down once she realized no one intended to hurt her. But Emily fought. According to Daniel, everything unraveled in seconds. Panic replaced control. Noise replaced planning. When it was over, he said, he didn't know how to stop what came next. Laura listened as he spoke, her face pale, tears streaking silently. When Kane asked what role she played, Laura said she hadn't been there at the start, but admitted she helped afterward. She said she was afraid. She said she felt trapped. She said she loved him. Investigators later noted how carefully those words were chosen. Search warrants followed quickly. At another property connected to Daniel, officers discovered heavy bags hidden where no one was meant to look. Inside were remains that confirmed the truth investigators had already pieced together. Forensic specialists would later testify that Emily had resisted fiercely, leaving behind evidence of her struggle in places Daniel had missed. The house where Emily disappeared became a sealed crime scene. Floors were removed. Walls were tested. What had once been a family home turned into a hollowed-out shell, stripped down to its bones in search of answers. Digital analysts uncovered another layer: messages, searches, private conversations between Daniel and Laura that painted a disturbing picture of shared ideas and obsessions. They weren't impulsive. They weren't accidental. They were rehearsed in words long before they were attempted in real life. When Daniel was formally arrested, the charge list was long and heavy. Laura was taken into custody shortly after. Outside the station, cameras flashed. Neighbors cried. Emily's name was spoken aloud again and again, as if repetition alone could bring her back. But the case was no longer about finding her. It was about proving, beyond doubt, how carefully her disappearance had been engineered, and how violently it had ended. And the courtroom would be the next place where the truth would be forced into the light. The months leading up to the trial were heavy with waiting. Emily's face stared out from memorial posters taped to storefront windows and school bulletin boards. Candles appeared on the front steps of the house she never walked out of. Strangers left flowers. Classmates left notes written in shaky handwriting, filled with apologies they never had a chance to say out loud. Inside the courthouse, the case file grew thicker by the day. Prosecutors rebuilt the timeline piece by piece. Receipts showed when the purchases were made. Surveillance footage placed Daniel and Laura at separate stores within a narrow window of time. Digital records mapped their movements with cold precision: who was where, and when, and how long they stayed. Forensic experts prepared reports that left little room for doubt. The faint traces in Emily's bedroom told a story of resistance. The cleanup attempts told a story of intent. The transport of the remains to a secondary location told a story of planning beyond panic. And then there were the messages. Investigators uncovered long chains of private conversations between Daniel and Laura, messages that spoke in coded language, layered with meaning they both clearly understood. Prosecutors would later argue that these exchanges revealed not just complicity, but encouragement. A shared world built in secret, one where lines blurred and responsibility dissolved. Laura's defense team pushed back hard. They painted her as manipulated, frightened, pulled into something she didn't fully understand until it was too late. They emphasized what she hadn't done, where she hadn't been at the beginning, what she hadn't physically carried out. Daniel's defense took a different path. They admitted involvement but argued the outcome wasn't intended. They described chaos. Fear. A situation spiraling out of control. The courtroom filled on the first day of testimony. Emily's family sat together, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles turned white. They listened as witnesses described the search efforts, the silence of Emily's phone, the moment hope began to fade. Some jurors wiped their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, jaws set. Detective Kane took the stand and spoke calmly, carefully, walking the jury through each step of the investigation. She didn't dramatize. She didn't editorialize. She let the facts speak, and they spoke loudly enough. When the forensic specialist described the evidence of Emily's final moments, the room went still. No details were exaggerated. None needed to be. Daniel avoided eye contact with the jury. Laura cried often, her face buried in her hands, though observers noted how quickly the tears stopped when cameras weren't present. Outside, the community waited. Every update led the evening news. Every testimony rippled outward, reopening wounds that had never really closed. Parents hugged their children tighter. Doors were locked earlier. Trust felt thinner than it had before. As the prosecution rested its case, one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a reckoning, and the verdict would decide not only guilt, but how the community would remember the choices that led to Emily's final morning. Closing arguments arrived like a held breath finally released. The prosecution spoke first, their voice steady, almost restrained. They reminded the jury of the planning, the purchases made hours before Emily vanished, the coordination between two adults who knew exactly what they were doing. They replayed the timeline slowly, methodically, until the gaps the defense had tried to widen simply disappeared. This didn't begin with panic, the prosecutor said. It began with intent. They spoke of responsibility, not just for actions, but for choices made afterward. For the cleaning. For the transport. For the silence. Each step, the prosecution argued, required thought. Required agreement. Required time. Then the defense teams rose. Daniel's attorney asked the jury to see a man overwhelmed by fear, someone who made catastrophic decisions under pressure. He acknowledged Daniel's guilt but urged the jury to consider degrees, intent versus outcome, planning versus collapse. Laura's attorney focused on separation. On distance. On moments where she wasn't present. They spoke of influence and imbalance, of someone pulled into darkness rather than leading the way. They asked the jury to consider how far involvement truly went, and where it stopped. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom emptied slowly. No one spoke. Emily's family held onto each other, eyes fixed on the door through which the jurors had disappeared. The wait lasted 2 days. Outside, reporters speculated quietly. Inside, time stretched. Every sound echoed too loudly. Every footstep made hearts jump. When the jury finally returned, the room stood. The foreperson's voice trembled slightly as the verdicts were read. Daniel Brooks was found guilty on all major charges related to Emily's abduction and death. The words landed heavily, one after another, each confirming what the evidence had long shown. Laura Miles was not found guilty of the most severe charge, but was found guilty of serious involvement in the events that followed. The jury determined she had helped facilitate, conceal, and protect what had been done. Emily's mother let out a sound that was half breath, half sob. Her father closed his eyes. For a moment, no one moved. Sentencing came weeks later. Daniel was given a sentence that ensured he would never return to ordinary life. Laura received a lengthy sentence of her own, lesser, but still measured in decades, not years. Neither spoke during sentencing. As deputies led them away, Daniel glanced once toward the gallery. Laura didn't look back at all. The judge addressed the family directly, acknowledging the depth of their loss, the permanence of it. Words, he admitted, could not repair what had been broken. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast, heavy with rain that never quite fell. The legal process was finished. But the story, Emily's story, was far from over. In the weeks after sentencing, the town tried to return to normal, but normal no longer fit the way it used to. Emily's school held an assembly in silence. Her desk remained empty, a small laminated photo taped to its corner by a teacher who couldn't bring herself to remove it. Friends spoke about her in careful sentences, as if saying her name too loudly might reopen something that never truly closed. At the edge of the neighborhood, a memorial took shape. Flowers, notes, bracelets, and candles gathered beneath a simple wooden sign bearing Emily's name. Some messages came from people who had known her well. Others came from strangers, parents, teenagers, passers-by, each one touched by a case that had forced them to imagine the unthinkable happening in their own homes. Emily's family moved slowly through their days. Mornings were the hardest. Her mother still woke at the same hour, instinctively listening for footsteps that would never come. Her father avoided the upstairs hallway entirely. Some doors stayed closed. Some lights were never turned on again. Detective Kane attended the memorial once, standing quietly at the edge. She didn't speak. She never stayed long at scenes like this. Closure, she knew, was a word used more by paperwork than by people. The investigation files were archived. Evidence was catalogued and stored away. The house where it all began was eventually sold, renovated, repainted, its past buried beneath fresh walls and new owners who would never quite understand why the neighbors watched it so closely. But the lessons lingered. Parents spoke more openly with their children. Teachers noticed changes sooner. The community learned how easily trust could be exploited, and how silence could be engineered. Emily was remembered not for the way she died, but for the way she lived, her laugh, her impatience, her habit of overusing exclamation points. Her friends said she had plans. Her family said she had dreams. Both were true. On the anniversary of her disappearance, the memorial candles were lit again. The wind flickered the flames, but none went out. Emily's story became a warning, a heartbreak, and a promise all at once, a reminder that evil doesn't always arrive from the outside, and that vigilance begins at home. And though justice could never give Emily back, it ensured one thing remained clear. Her voice, silenced that morning at 7:12, would not be forgotten.